rocks! Woo! Wow, Kenan went to San Francisco and fell in love with a Mustang. Hi everyone, I'm Kenan from Cars and Bids. In today's video, we're going to be discussing something very special. This is a Ford Mustang GT350R, and when it came out, journalists raved that this was one of the best driver's cars that you could buy. Our very own Quirkmaster said that's one of the most surprising cars he's ever driven. Now, I've never driven a GT350R, and so I'm really excited to get to spend some time with this one today. Before I get going, surprise, surprise, this GT350R is currently for sale, being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This is a 2016 GT350R, and it comes with some desirable factory equipment, including the electronics package and some standard equipment that's really desirable in the GT350R, such as its Voodoo V8, its Tremec 6-speed manual transmission, and carbon fiber wheels. This one also looks very sinister, finished in triple black. And if you've been in the market for one of these, after you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below where you can head to the live auction of this one. You can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. And we begin the story of the GT350R by first discussing the GT350 and its origins. Originally made in 1965, the first GT350 was the brainchild of Carroll Shelby and Shelby American. The idea was that he wanted to squeeze a big V8 into a Mustang and make it a very high-performance focused car, and he did so with the very first GT350s by putting the 289 V8 from the Cobra into those cars. This car was also huge for marketing, and having a Cobra engine was a big deal. It was even optional to get Cobra valve covers on it so that you really could emphasize the time between that and the race cars made by Carroll Shelby. But Shelby being Shelby, he was focused on making cars that were competitive for the racetrack, and in 1965, 34 GT350s were selected to compete in the SCCA's B Production Championship, and it was a huge success. That car would go on to win 3 seasons in a row, proving that the GT350 recipe really worked. The GT500 would come later, and that car would be focused on true brute force with a much bigger V8, but the GT350 was always focused on finesse and track performance. In 1966, though, the GT350 would become a little bit more accessible to the normal driver. You could get some creature comforts in that car that you couldn't get in the original cars, including an automatic transmission, optional rear seats, various colors, things like that. It was more of a soft road-focused experience as opposed to an outright track car. Regardless, though, that car was successful, and in 1967 it was followed up with the second generation. That car was produced from 67 to 68, and then the third generation, which was produced from 1969 until 1970. And the cars were popular as they were more focused driver's cars than the standard Mustang, but they weren't quite as outright powerful as the GT500 of the same years. However, after those early cars, it would be some time before a GT350 would return to the streets. And in 2011, Shelby American introduced the GT350 as a post-title Mustang, meaning that you bought a normal Mustang from Ford and you sent it to Shelby where they turned it into a GT350. Then in 2015, Ford wanted to produce a Mustang GT350, but they set a very ambitious target. They wanted the car to legitimately compete against cars like the Porsche 911 and the BMW M3 and M4. And so they gave us the GT350, and they gave it a lot of special touches. Most notable among them, of course, is the famed Voodoo V8, a naturally aspirated 5.2-liter flat plane crank V8, which is a really big deal as a flat plane crank V8 had never been used in a Mustang before. It was an engineering tour de force, and journalists loved this car. It was hugely popular, but Ford wasn't done yet. They wanted to go one step further and take the fight to the daddy of them all. In many people's eyes, the most important and best driving driver's car ever made, and that was the GT3, and they did so with this car. It still used the same Voodoo engine that was found in the standard GT350, but it got a lot more special touches and a tweaked design to take the fight to the GT3. And it did it. This car was a huge success, and journalists raved about how amazing the GT350R was. It won Car and Driver's 2016 Performance Car of the Year, and, well, it was instantly cemented in the hearts of driving enthusiasts everywhere. The GT350R was produced from 2015 until 2020, and when it went away, well, it was quite a loss, as this was a really special car. For drivers, having a naturally aspirated engine and a manual transmission is a really big deal, and so when this car went away, well, we've certainly missed it. But it goes down in history as one of the best driver's cars ever made, and that's no mistake, as this car was fastidiously designed to be truly something special. And now it's time to talk about the design of the GT350R, and, well, frankly, it's not easy to tell a GT350R apart from a GT350 except for a couple of additions. Most notably up front, you have this extended lip spoiler, which gives you more downforce at the front of this car, meaning that you have better turn-in stability at high speeds. At the rear of the car, of course, you have this gigantic wing, probably the easiest way to spot an R, and it gives you even more downforce at the rear of this car. But other than that, there are no GT350R badges on the outside of this car at all. It just says GT350 located on the fenders, and that's effectively it. You really don't know this is an R necessarily other than those two things until you look inside, and of course you see that there's a plaque that states that it's an R. But that's not by accident, as the standard GT350 was an excellent platform for Ford to build on. You have to think of the R more as the GT3 RS, in that this car receives more special touches compared to the standard GT350. One of the most special exterior touches that Ford would add would be these wheels. And although they don't look like much, they're very special as they're made of carbon fiber. This was a huge deal, as this was the first mass production road car to use carbon fiber wheels. And they are very light. They weigh 15 pounds less per wheel than their aluminum counterparts. And that's really important because that reduces the unsprung weight of this car, which aids tremendously in handling. Lightweight was a general focus of the GT350R, as this car would weigh 130 pounds less than the GT350 equivalent, and one of the ways that Ford was able to do this was by reducing the weight out of these wheels. The weight reduction didn't end here though, as a lot of things on this car were optional. You could remove the air conditioning, the radio, and the GT350R didn't come with rear seats, and all of this was done again in the name of lightweight. But while we're down here, we have to discuss the GT350R's brakes, as they are massive. This car has 15.5-inch front rotors with 6 piston calipers and 14.9-inch rear rotors with 4 piston calipers, giving this car plenty of stopping performance. Now, the rotors are special on this car because they're floating rotors, which means that there are little pieces of metal that attach the rotor hat to the rotor itself. And this is beneficial because it helps with cooling, which is really important on the track-focused version of the GT350. And now it's time to climb under the hood of the Mustang and talk about this car's suspension. We'll get to the engine, but I want to start with the suspension, as it's very special. The GT350R is equipped with Ford's MagneRide suspension, and it was the first that was fitted to a Mustang. The way the system works is that the shock tubes are filled with a magnetic fluid that, when you pass current through it, can change the flow rate of the fluid, meaning that you can increase or decrease the stiffness of the shock and the rebound. This is beneficial because it can be done instantly, but it can also be done infinitely, which gives the engineers a lot of control over the shock and rebound of the suspension on this car. All right, we can't ignore it anymore. We have to talk about this car's engine. This is the 5.2-liter Voodoo flat plane crank V8 at the heart of the GT350R. Now, this is a really big deal because a flat plane crank is something very exotic. It's usually reserved for cars like Ferraris, but here we find it in a Mustang. And the really big thing about this is a high displacement engine. Unlike a lot of Ferrari engines, which are actually quite small, this engine is quite large. And it was actually bench tested against the Ferrari California V8 as well as the 458's V8. Despite being much larger than those engines, this engine actually weighs 13 pounds less than that found in the 458 despite its size, and it makes excellent horsepower. This car produces 526 horsepower and 429 foot-pounds of torque, and while that might not sound like an insane feat today, you have to remember that this car is naturally aspirated, and this car is designed to be a high rever with an engine that worked in tandem with the chassis. Ford didn't want to put insane amounts of power into this car. If you wanted that, you'd buy a GT500. So instead, they focused on making sure that this car had very high revving capabilities, and they made it more exotic than the standard Ford Mustang's V8. The GT350R's engine is very similar to that found in the standard GT350, but it would receive some revisions, including changes to the timing change and the valve lashes. But otherwise, it is largely the same as that found in the standard GT350. Not a complaint, as this is one special power plant. Before we leave the engine bay of the GT350R, we have to talk about carbon fiber. Now, I've mentioned that the wheels are made out of carbon fiber and the rear wing is too, but so is the core support in this car, and Ford was really proud of it. Stamped right across the top of it says in big letters, carbon fiber composite, to make sure that you knew that this piece in particular was made of carbon fiber. I don't know why they felt the need to label this. I just think it's funny that they really wanted to drive this home. Not the wheels, they didn't want to label those, they didn't want to make those a beautiful carbon fiber weave. They just painted them black, and same thing with the spoiler, but this core support, well son, that's got carbon fiber composite for you. Moving inside the GT350R, one thing is very clear, in that this car is focused. There's not a lot of excess in this car, and that's most apparent because, well, it has no rear seats. Ford removed them again, specifically to reduce weight on the interior of this car. The 6-speed manual transmission is also on proud display here, and that's because it's from Tremec and it's one of their finer gearboxes. Compared to the lower trim Mustangs, this gearbox is something special as it's slightly more lightweight, and the shift action in this transmission is known for being excellent. It can also handle a lot of power if you choose to modify your Mustang, and it was a great application for the GT350R. The last thing I want to discuss about in the interior of the GT350R would be the sheer amount of information that's available to the driver. Located on the screen between the tachometer and speedometer, you can view a lot of different information about this car. For instance, you can view your G meter, which of course tells you where all the gravitational forces are being applied to your car, and you can view things like your braking performance. And of course, all of these are a little bit gimmicky, but they were track-focused apps because Ford knew their customers. They knew people were going to take this car to the track and might want to, well, track that information. This car is also very adjustable. Located on the steering wheel are a series of buttons to adjust various parts of this car. You have one to adjust the suspension. You can choose between standard and sport modes to adjust how stiffly the car rides. You can also adjust the steering weight of this car because this has electronically assisted steering, and so they give you an option to choose and dial in your level of steering assist. All of these little pieces of adjustment and information may seem a little bit gimmicky, but they were focused on one thing, giving the driver the exact experience they were looking for. And speaking of driving, well, it's time to go do exactly that. Driving the GT350R. And I'm taking it easy to start. So right away, the thing I want to talk about is how unbelievably nice this transmission feels. I'm instantly at home using this transmission. It's so good. The gear response when you're shifting is so positive, and it's just easy to use. It's nice, the shift throw is nice and short. I'm in love with this transmission already. That and like the pedals are really easy to operate. The clutch is super light in this car, but everything is just like very nicely judged. And like just using the transmission, blipping the throttle on downshift is so easy and nice. I also have the exhaust currently in quiet mode, and you get this great induction noise. Now anybody who's watched any video I've done knows that I have a preference for induction noise to exhaust. That said, one flick of the switch and you have the loud exhaust mode, which it just sounds ridiculous. It's so deeply antisocial. So when you put it back in normal mode, it really makes a difference in this car. That said, of course, it sounds amazing. This engine is so special. A flat plane crank in general is a very special engine, but to have it in an American car of this displacement is unreal, to be totally honest with you. You won't often find that, and I think that's very appealing. So I got in the car immediately and I adjusted the steering. Again, this car has electric steering, as I mentioned, and I dialed it into the heaviest setting. I like a heavier steering setup in general, and this car certainly has that. It's pinpoint accurate. You move the steering wheel just a little bit and you feel it dictate the angle of the car immediately. That's pretty amazing. Man, just like weaving back and forth a little bit, there's like no body roll in this car. It is so good. I'm astonished at how good that is. Now, the ride, of course, is stiff. I've been told that this car might have aftermarket springs. They're not exactly sure, but I don't think it. Now, granted, these roads are glass smooth, but I don't think it rides like too aggressively. And even so, you can dial down the dampers. I have it in normal right now. Sport makes it definitely very stiff, but I usually tend to like cars in their normal damper setting. I think that's kind of where I live in my world. But man, you flex your toe just a little bit, and you that engine makes its presence known, which I adore. This car is a celebration of all the great driving elements that come together to make it really special. NA V8 manual transmission rear wheel drive. That is the recipe for a great driver's car. Immediately, even like dissociating all of the hype that surrounds this car, because anybody who's ever driven one at any point has talked about how amazing it is. I see it and feel it instantly. Like I'm getting it. I understand. All right, we're gonna turn on exhaust mode and be antisocial for just a little bit. It's so loud. It's so ridiculous. You know, living in San Diego, I hear a lot of like loud Mustangs ripping around. A lot of military guys with their Mustangs, which is great. I get it. Like, this car is it's just a hoot. It's just so loud when you have that mode turned on. It's ridiculous. Oh. The way I can best describe that sound is just a fat V8 sound. It does not sound like the flat plane crank that's found in a Ferrari. And I guess that's partially just due to the sheer displacement of this engine, because it's so gigantic compared to most Ferrari flat plane crank V8s. It's just hilarious. I love it. Sorry, we're gonna turn that off. I can't annoy the people too much of this beautiful town. Honestly, it is fascinating when you turn off the exhaust noise, when you turn it down and you just have the in-cabin noise, you get so much more induction sound. And like I was saying, that's just what I like. I like that more. It's fun to dial up the exhaust, and it's easy to make a V8 sound good. But yeah, it's it's really fun. As I mentioned earlier in the video too, the suspension system in this car is very special. Having MagneRide in this car is a game changer, frankly. It's a wonderful suspension system. And the fact that Ford thought to apply it here makes a lot of sense. I think that was also really critical in making this car be a genuine competitor to the GT3. I mean, this car is relatively heavy. Ford did go to lengths to make it lighter, but still, like, you have to kind of pull out all the stops. The GT3 is one of the best driving cars that money can buy. And if you want to compete with that, well, gotta step up your game. Oh, and this car does. Wow. Wow. That engine. All right, here we go. Wow. Oh my God, that's amazing. Oh, and the brakes. Oh boy, baby. Woo! Wow. Wow. This car is amazing. That is outstanding. Holy crap. This car rules. Oh, let's do it again. Oh yeah. This car rocks. Woo! Damn. What a masterpiece of an engine. Wow, Kenan went to San Francisco and fell in love with a Mustang. The thing is, of course, if you're not a snob, then this car will blow your mind. If you are a snob and you have bad snob, but you don't want to drive a Mustang, you don't want to be associated with like all of the social implications of what that means. I get that, but like, drive the thing. This car is amazing. If you truly are an enthusiast of driving, I think even for multiples of how much this car costs, you're gonna struggle to find a driving experience that is like this. This car is special. It's very special. And I've fallen in love a little bit.
just a bit. Man, something to think about.
And that is the Mustang GT350R. This car is astonishing, as it truly is the American approach to the 911 GT3's recipe. It has a high-revving, naturally aspirated engine, a 6-speed manual transmission, rear-wheel drive, unbelievable chassis dynamics, and, well, it's as amazing as everyone says it is. And if you've been in the market for a GT350R, well, you can check out our selection of this and other Mustangs only on Cars and Bids. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you very soon. Goodbye.